Hello and welcome to Unhacked. I'm Brian Graff, SVP of Compliance Advisory here at Abacode, and today we're going to do something a little different. The next few Unhacked episodes are going to deal with CMMC. If you are in the federal government vendor space, you've probably already started to prepare for CMMC, or at least started to worry about preparing for CMMC. However, CMMC is a program that's going to affect a lot of vendors in the U.S., a lot of Abacode customers, and pretty much anyone in the IT space. So we want to make sure that our customers are aware of what's coming down the pike. So what is CMMC? CMMC is short for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification and is being rolled out by the Department of Defense to Defense Industrial Base vendors, or DIB vendors. DIB vendors are vendors that are private or public organizations that handle CUI, Controlled Unclassified Information, or FCI, Federal Contract Information, is information that is gathered, distributed, or created by or on behalf of federal agencies. So a little bit deeper dive into what CUI and what FCI is. So CUI is an extremely broad term that includes any information or data that is generated by a federal agency or on behalf of a federal agency that is required to be secured by a minimum level of security controls. So that's extremely broad, but basically any federal agency information or data that isn't classified or isn't deemed public is potentially CUI. Think of CUI as a data or information that is used by third-party organizations and vendors in service of a federal agency. So that term can be extremely broad. Federal contract information is the data that is exchanged and required to create statements of work and agreements between federal agencies and private or public vendors. So this is usually lower in sensitivity, but would still require some protection. For instance, FCI can include things like network diagrams, description of sensitive environments, scoping documentation, anything that may give an enemy insight into a federal agency's security program may be deemed FCI and also needs to be secured. So why is this happening? Why is the DoD rolling out CMMC? Well, prior to CMMC, the DoD required that DIB vendors comply with NIST 800-171 via self-attestation. Okay. NIST 800-171 is a set of controls, security controls that DoD required vendors to apply over their CUI environments, the environments that are storing, processing, or transmitting controlled unclassified information, and FCI. The NIST 800-171 program was self-attestation based, meaning there was never a third-party auditor going out to these vendors and making sure these controls were in place. So as you can imagine, many of these organizations weren't compliant, even if they thought they were, and some of them were just skipping out on this altogether. We've talked to vendors that didn't even know they were supposed to comply with NIST 800-171, even though they were a federal agency vendor. So there was a lot of confusion and a lot of disconnect between federal agency vendors and the agencies in terms of what was required and the rigor to which these security controls needed to be applied. And because there was no third-party attestation, organizations that weren't compliant could remain that way for years and no one would know until a breach occurred. So the DoD started doing studies, and in 2014 through 2018 noted that an incredible amount of money was being lost every year due to cybersecurity attacks on these vendors by foreign agents or even domestic agents trying to access this data and shut down these organizations in an attempt to extort them with ransomware. And NIST 800-171, although it was a strong security standard, if it's not being applied correctly, those CUI and FCI networks were still vulnerable. So in response to this, the DoD rolled out CMMC, which is not only a security standard that borrows the controls from NIST 800-171 and a few other standards, but also includes a maturity model. So not only do you have to have the security controls in place, it gives you a step-by-step guide as to how you have to implement that control. So unlike NIST 800-171, there are 5 levels of maturity that are described in the CMMC model. And those levels are level 1, performed, level 2, documented, level 3 managed, level 4 reviewed, and level 5 optimized. So you can have the same control, but depending on the level of maturity you're looking to reach, your overall program may look different. Let's take an example control and run through each maturity level and show what is required. What would the auditor look for when they're coming in to assess you against CMMC? So we'll take 3.11 from NIST 800-171, which states that the vendors are required to limit system access to authorized users and devices. So basically making sure you're controlling access to your CUI environment. So level 1 just means the control has to be performed, meaning you have to have some sort of system, Active Directory, any sort of access control system that limits access to whatever environment is storing this data to authorized users, and you have to be able to prove that. So at level 1, all you would need to do is provide a list of users from that system and devices, and the auditor would go through and determine that a sample of users are they're all authorized or they're not authorized, and mark against you on that. But that's all the evidence you would have to provide in order to comply with CMMC. Assuming that list actually is all authorized users and devices. So level 2 means the control has to be documented. Not only has to be in place, you not only have to have the mechanism, but you have to have a policy and procedure in place to describe to your personnel the minimum requirements of that control and a step-by-step guide that allows someone knowledgeable in that area to carry out that security control. So a good rule of thumb in terms of documenting policies and procedures is policies just describe the absolute do's and don'ts of a security control. So a policy can be simply access must be restricted to authorized users, access must be approved, and access must be documented. That's your policy. Now, your procedure should be a guide to where your IT administrators, whoever is granting this access, knows what to do in order to actually carry out the control and document it. So it'll be a guide saying, go into XYZ system, or make sure you are filling out a ticket with these descriptors, and has to be sent to this person or that person for approval. You get the ticket back. You apply access based on roles, and that's it. So you have the policy, the procedure, and you have the output from your access control system, and you would be technically level 2 compliant. Now, I do want to stress that there really is not going to be, or their DoD has no plans to require level 2 compliance with CMMC. As of now, the only plans are to require organizations to go through level 1 if all they do is store FCI, and level 3 if they store CUI. Now that's going to increase in the future, but for right now, that's the DoD plan. However, even if you're just level 1, it is really a good idea to have policies and procedures in place. You want to give your employees minimum requirements and guides to perform their duties. Otherwise, they can come back to you and say, well, I didn't know how to do it, and you have no recourse in terms of proving that employee was deficient in their duties because you never told them exactly what it is they need to do. So we've gone through level 1 and level 2. Level 3 means managed. So that not only do you have the policy and procedure in place, but there's also oversight over this control. So there's an access review that occurs, let's say monthly, and administrators are going in and looking at those users themselves, basically performing their own mini audit. And if they find unauthorized users, they investigate, try to figure out why that user is still there, and they remove that user if need be. So if you have evidence of the access control system limiting access, the policy procedure, and then you can show over time that you are performing those access reviews, you're level 3 compliant with that particular control. So moving forward to reviewed, now you're reviewing the access review itself. So you want to make sure that your control is moving in the right direction. So if you take a couple sets of access reviews and you find that over time more and more terminated users are being found, that could be evidence that another control or this process is becoming deficient. Maybe there's a new admin that doesn't understand the process and is granting access without required approval. Maybe terminated employees aren't being communicated to the IT department, so they don't know when to terminate an employee's access. you're not going to know that unless over time you're reviewing the trend of these access reviews and making sure that that control is in place. And the final step, optimized, this is going to start to sound like Inception here, but now you're reviewing those quarterly access reviews. So at level 3, we're doing, let's say, a monthly access review. At level 4, the executive management is doing a quarterly business review, which includes review of these access reviews and making sure the trend is going in the right way. You want to make sure that the number of unauthorized personnel is going down, unless there's some other mitigating factor. I mean, let's say you're just expanding and there's more systems in place. So there might be a reason why you're finding more terminated users. Maybe there's going to be a level of pain as you grow, and you can accept that risk. But it's up to management to first identify that risk and accept it or mitigate it. At the optimized level, now you're actually looking at those remediation plans. So you're going to look at a few quarters in a row and say, okay, executive management determined in quarter 1 and quarter 2 that the list of unauthorized users, the number of unauthorized users is going up and up. And they put remediation plans in place for Q1 and Q2. Now it's Q4 and the trend is still going up. So not only does that tell you that the access control is failing, but that executive review is also failing because they're putting in plans to reduce this risk and it's not being reduced. So that's at an overall program level. We need to make sure that maybe we need to do more reviews. Maybe the personnel that are included in this review don't have the expertise to actually run remediation plans. But you're not going to know that until you're reviewing the executive review of that access control. So that's a quick and easy guide for the levels of CMMC and what is required for each one. Over the next few weeks, we're going to take a deeper dive into CMMC and give you guidance as to how to begin to implement a CMMC program at your organization. So I hope to see you over the next few weeks. And this is Brian Graff with Unhacked.